So I keep getting asked this question time and time again. Apparently, it's nearly impossible to explain why a phone call wasn't made from one of the survivors until 8 hours after the murders had occurred. But I'm going to give it a good shot at explanation. So basically, one of the things that we really need to take into account here is that we understand the end of the events. So we, the public, have information that the survivors just didn't have any access to or knowledge of. And that would be that when police arrived to an unconscious person outside of the residence of 1122 King Road, they would go inside to find 4 University of Idaho students murdered inside their bedrooms. But to try and understand this a little better, we need to pause and rewind the version of events and go back to the beginning. And we'll try and explain our way in and out of certain aspects here. So we understand that the 2 surviving roommates didn't go out with the 4 victims that night. But from what we now know, Kaylee, Maddie, Xana and Ethan came back to the home roughly around 2 AM and were all intoxicated. Dylan and Bethany, however, didn't go out that night, but witnessed them coming home. So they would have witnessed them in the intoxicated state that they were potentially in. Now it's believed that after the night occurred, roughly around 3 AM, everyone inside of that home was now inside of their bedrooms. Now at roughly around 4 AM, someone enters the home and first goes upstairs. And in doing so, the now accused killer attacks both Kaylee and Maddie. And from what we now understand, the surviving roommate, Dylan, believes that she's waking up to what she thinks is Kaylee upstairs playing with her dog, which potentially means that she's waking up to the end of the attack. And what she's hearing is footsteps upstairs as the accused killer is moving around the bed. Now, a lot of people ensue that there must have been screaming and a lot of noise coming from upstairs, but what they don't understand is that the individual used a K-bar and more than likely struck below the neck. And in striking below the neck with a weapon to that degree, it's more than likely that the accused killer actually punctured each of the individual's lungs. And in doing so, and I've said time and time again, you cannot scream while you are drowning. The individuals, after being stabbed in that area, would be drowning on their own blood. If they were stabbed in the heart, it can take roughly 4 to 8 seconds for an individual to go out cold. And because of this, it's probably likely that the attack upstairs was probably vicious but very quick. And that's because of the method of killing, weapon being used, and its effectiveness in what it's being used for. But what people understand again is that we understand the end of the events, which is that in the morning the bodies of Kaylee and Maddie would be found, whereas Dylan is thinking that she's waking up to what she believes is Kaylee upstairs playing with her dog. This isn't exactly and doesn't warrant a lot of reason to go rushing upstairs or calling the police at this point, which would explain why she merely goes to her door and checks outside. But by the time that Dylan's checking outside, it's probably unfortunate that upstairs Kaylee and Maddie have succumbed to the injuries that they've unfortunately received. And because of this, the house would have more than likely at this point gone silent. Again, giving no reason for Dylan to go hunting around the house or seeing what it was that she thinks was just Kaylee playing with her dog. Moments later, the accused killer will then go down the stairs, past Dylan's door, take a left and straight down to Ethan and Xana's room. Now, one of the reasonings as to why he went there as opposed to Dylan's room is because when the accused killer would have entered the home, it's more than likely that he would have had some kind of knowledge that Xana was awake, as later on investigators would discover that Xana was on TikTok at roughly 4 AM, indicating that Xana was awake and on her phone at this time, and this could have alerted her presence to the accused killer when he entered the home. Now at some point, Dylan hears something to the degree of someone saying there's someone here, but the survivor is unable to distinguish whether this is coming from upstairs or from Xana's room. As at first, investigators even thought that this may have come from Kaylee, but later discovered it was more than likely coming from Xana, as again, she was the individual that was awake at this time. Someone's here could have been Xana trying to wake Ethan to alert the presence of the fact that she believed that someone was there. But this to Dylan could have been a distorted noise that's coming from down the hallway that's hard for her to distinguish what is actually being said. And because of the fact that these individuals have come back from a night out, them saying that there's someone here might not be the craziest of things. Take for example the fact that later on we actually learned that Kaylee was texting at roughly 3:30 to 3:50 AM. Kaylee was trying to text her ex-partner Jack, and we don't know what was being said, but Kaylee could have been trying to communicate that she wanted to go over and see Jack, or vice versa, that she wanted Jack to come over and see her. And this could indicate that at some point in the night, Kaylee would either leave and go and see Jack, or Jack would come over and see her. What people need to understand and try and remember here is that Dylan isn't the sole person in the house that lives there. There's 5 other individuals that are in there at this point. And those 5 other individuals too lead their own lives. Just because they live together and are close, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're always inside of each other's business. But living together, they all have their own lives where they all might do their own things. And to Dylan, hearing that there's someone here may have just been one of those indications that she believes that one of the other individuals, friends or boyfriends, has come over to the house. As the majority of them have been out as the majority of them have been out all night drinking, and we know from police-worn body cam footage that there were individuals outside of that home at roughly 3 a.m. So this shows us that there are individuals that are out and about around this time, but it's not until roughly an hour later that the murders occur. But this could indicate that when there were young individuals out and about drinking, that they could go to each other's houses as after parties when the pubs and clubs all closed for the evening. And Dylan could simply think that one of the individuals has someone that's come over, or that upstairs Kaylee and Maddie are playing with the dog, but it's more than likely not going to jump to her head that the immediate thing that she's thinking of is murder. And from what we know, there were no screams that were coming from the house. As I've mentioned earlier, with the wounds that these individuals have received, it's more than likely that they're out cold quite quickly. And we know from next door CCTV that the only things that are picked up are a thud, as well as the dog barking. Now, if Dylan's thinking that upstairs Kaylee and Maddie have been playing with the dog and the dog starts barking, that might put into theory that she believes it's just them that's been messing around with the dog. And that it's simply nothing more than that, and there's no reason to go and check. Neither is there a reason to ring the police and assume that upstairs someone has been murdered. It's jumping from 0 to 100 real quick. And if next door's CCTV picked up the noise that we now know is the thud, which is more than likely Xana's body hitting the floor, then that camera too would have picked up screams if screams were made. But no screams were made. And that's one of the indications and one of the factors and reasons as to why the survivor didn't go out and check as to what had gone on. One other thing to take into accountability is if Dylan had left her room that night after the accused killer had left through those sliding doors and found all the individuals, no ambulance would have got there in time to be able to save them. By the time the accused killer had actually left the home, the individuals had succumbed to their injuries. That's how bad the wounds are inside of that home. And the reasons why they couldn't scream is because the second they're hit in the heart, that also goes through to the lungs, and the second they're hit in the lungs, they bleed to death. And when they bleed to death, blood seeps inside of the lungs and they can't scream as they're literally drowning to death. The close proximity of the attack, as well as the shock that would have gone into these individuals, just probably wouldn't have left them awake for very long, neither fighting for their lives. The only individual that may have been able to have actually fought for her life would have been Xana. But from what we know, Dylan thinks that coming down the hallway she hears some kind of crying. Again, we know that Dylan understands that Xana's come back with her boyfriend Ethan, who doesn't actually live there. The crying, she could think, is just some drunken antics that have gone on from the night, and maybe Xana's an emotional person and sometimes she ends up crying and Ethan's there to emotionally support her. These are facts that we don't know, that we might find out later on. But this could just be one of those things when you've been living with someone for years, you just don't want to go and intercept into someone else's drunken business, because it might just be in the morning when they're embarrassed about the actions that they did last night and regret crying and merely just want to move on past it. After you've gone through this occasion a few times, you start to give up on wanting to help. And hearing her crying from down the hallway, she could have just thought that something had gone on with her boyfriend or some kind of argument had ensued. Now, the reason why Dylan goes into shock when she sees an individual leaving the house is because Dylan doesn't know who the individual is. We also know that Dylan's gone to sleep that night and we don't know the attire and what she's actually wearing and what she stood at when she's at her door. She could have froze because she's wearing a dressing gown and she sees an individual that she doesn't know and doesn't want to expose herself to. Whereas she might have been a little bit more comfortable with the individuals that are already inside the house walking around, which she thinks are already going to be there. Again, she's heard some kind of crying and what she may have thought could have been some kind of small argument or disagreement coming from down the hallway. And then she sees an individual leaving. So she just might think that the argument to that event is now over and she's just simply seeing someone leave. Now, freezing is a normal reaction to someone seeing someone that they don't know when they're walking past. It doesn't necessarily mean that she's in a complete state of shock and or panic at that point. And that's really important to try and understand and assess. It's weird, but people freeze as a natural reaction. Even animals do this. Animals do this when they're being preyed upon by a predator. And the reason being is because the line of sight from the predator is usually quite poor. And an animal can just simply stand still and risk not being attacked. Difference is with humans is that we freeze for a second and then it's fight or flight that usually kicks in. And fight or flight is just a normal response to things that are going on. One of the things that's interesting to try and understand is that people don't understand the individual that is Dylan herself. We don't understand how it is that she reacts to confrontation or confrontational situations, as well as how she handles herself. Some people don't like a confrontational situation, and even though they're hearing it going on and they may go to their door and try and check to see what it is that's going on, they might just be being nosy as opposed to wanting to get involved. Some people like Dylan could have seen the accused killer actually leaving and not knowing the situation that's going on. She could have subconsciously told herself that the individual didn't see her. She doesn't want to get involved in somebody else's argument and simply just shut her door away and pretend that nothing's happened so that she can go back to bed and wake up in the morning, then find out from the individuals what it was that occurred that night. But it is important to try and factor in that Dylan understood that these individuals had come home from a night out that night. And we understand that the attack took place in a very short period of time. So we also understand that if we're putting 2 and 2 together, the attack in itself was probably quite quick. We also know that the attack in itself was also silent because of the weapon used, as well as what was picked up on CCTV. If it could have heard a thud and a dog barking, it certainly would have heard someone screaming, which was never heard from that night. No screaming would mean that there was no indication from anyone in the home that they needed any type of help. And simply thinking that you're hearing someone playing with the dog wouldn't alert you enough to think that you'd need to ring the police for any type of reason. So the version of events that happened in Dylan's eyes are also very quick and would have lasted around 10 minutes. A few minutes upstairs, to which we somewhat understand is potentially where Dylan woke up towards the end of, then downstairs to the second attack where the others would have been simply attacked in mere seconds. The accused killer could have then potentially waited, and when the accused killer would assume that the coast was clear, would then make his route out of the house. The reasoning why he doesn't see Dylan when he's leaving is simply just tunnel vision. The fact that the mission in his eyes is simply completed and the person that he was there to kill has been killed, or the fact that if he did see Dylan as he was exiting, he would more than likely have assumed that she's potentially rang the police. And this would mean that the accused killer didn't have any more time to go and take out Dylan or waste any more time inside of that home. So leaving would be the best option. To back up that theory is the fact that the individual sped away from the scene of the crime. He attracted attention to himself rather than just simply leaving and avoiding all attention. But from what we're understanding, Dylan's only hearing certain bits of muffled noises in a very short time span in a home in which she's lived with it, where we don't understand if this is a normality that people are inside and outside of the home all the time. It's an off-campus university home, with at that point in time 6 university students inside of it. 6 university students all individually living their lives. It's unknown to us, the public, whether Kaylee had people come over late at night, Maddie had people come over late at night, Xana may have had people come over late at night, Ethan may have had people come over late at night, Bethany may have had people come over late at night, and even Dylan herself may have had people come over late at night. And because of this interjection of so many people living inside of this home with so many lives going on, that's what's caused confusion for people not understanding that we understand the end of the event, which is when 4 University of Idaho students were unfortunately found dead inside of their home. At that point and at that stage of the night, Dylan wasn't aware to what was going on inside of the home, and being unaware to what was going on inside of the home, as well as the events that were going on inside of the home, would have led Dylan to simply just go back to sleep, because in her mind there was nothing that was going on that would have warranted her to believe that there was some kind of attack taking place. Neither would she believe that she would have needed to have intervened with anything at any point. And that would be why Dylan woke up 8 hours later, is because she simply had gone to bed very late that night. 8 hours later she'd wake up, and the second that she did, she began hyperventilating. The reason that the police were called to that house that day is because there was an individual that was hyperventilating and found unconscious outside of the home. That individual was Dylan, and the reason why she was hyperventilating and in that state and in that panic is because of whatever it was that she saw that morning. And the second that she saw it, she rang the police. Not only that, but the forensic download that would be found and taken on Dylan's phone, which is what she gave over immediately, will also provide investigators with a story of which she's given over to them. We just don't know all the versions of events that have taken place inside of that home yet. We don't know all sides to the story. But people seem to jump to conclusions, as it's one of the things that helps people subconsciously. I mean, just look at the pyramids, for example. We don't understand how they were built. And because of this, there's a whole load of theories and conspiracies about another race of aliens from different distant galaxies traveling light years to come all the way to Earth to basically plant pyramids all the way in Egypt. And that could have been the case, but people jump from the least extreme to most extreme immediately and then point accusation. We're just trying to logically go through some of the versions of events here that we've been given from the little information that we have so far. Doesn't mean that any of them are involved, but the forensic download and things that have been taken will prove necessary later on. Anyway, I hope some of this can help in some way, shape or form, and if it did, then drop a follow, but if not, then have a nice day.